And we are live. Welcome everybody to my favorite time of the quarter, the Great Comms Debate, our quarterly session where we get some of the brightest minds in communications in the same room, debating some of the hottest topics in the industry. Before we get started, one of the things we do like to do, and if you've been to one of our events before, you may have done this yourself. But one of the things we like to do in the beginning is just see where everybody's calling in from. So you see on the right-hand side of your screen, you have a little questions tab there. So there we go. Caroline is already in there with Suffolk, England. So just type in the questions tab. Let us know where you're calling in from. We really like to see where people are from. And here they start coming. Amsterdam, Germany, South Falls, London, lots of London in a row. All right, so we have Cleveland. We have a good audience already. Today, joining me, I have three amazing speakers. And if you follow any of our other content, you may have heard all of these guys talk on our Comms Minute podcast as well. So these, of course, are some of our Comms Minute staples. And Monique Zitnik, Mike Klein, and Rebecca Sangster-Kelly. So guys, thank you so much for joining us. And maybe before we get started, if you guys could quickly give a bit of an introduction, who you are, where you're from, what you do, just so the speakers can get to know you. So Monique, how about you go first?
Thank you, Alexander. I am an internal communications senior advisor at Open Communication, and I've got about 18 years experience in marketing and communication, focusing on internal communication. And I've just been elected as the vice chair of the IABC EMENA Region Board. So I can already see lots of fabulous people from the region online.
Amazing. Well, and thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations on the nomination. It's great to have you speaking with us today. And how about next we go with Mike. Mike, you're a comms debate veteran. You've done at least one of these before. But for those that don't know you,
at least one of these before.
Yeah.
My name is Mike Klein. I am principal at Changing the Turn, which is a communications practice based in Reykjavik, Iceland. And we do, and more precisely, I do internal communication, social communications, and some political communication. I'm also a senior advisor with Smart Strategic Services, helping Smart clients make the most of the platform and use it for strategic purposes. I'm the founder of We Lead Comms, an open source recognition movement in the communications business. And I'm currently doing research on remote first communication.
That's awesome. And I guess you're calling in from early morning Arizona today.
Correct. I'm with my parents in Arizona today.
Awesome. Hope you can stand the heat out there. Here it's getting pretty warm. Thanks for joining us, of course, again, Mike. Always a pleasure to have you here. And last but not least, Rebecca. Thank you for hopping on. And how about you give a brief introduction as well?
Sure. First off, for any Canadians in the audience, happy Canada Day. I'm a transplanted Canadian living in the UK and London, and I am a communications and stakeholder management coach with cross-industry experience, life sciences, energy, public sector, and I help people communicate, whether it's leadership communications, team communications, managing those stakeholders. I help people influence and empower.
Awesome, and thank you so much for joining. And yes, happy Canada Day indeed. We did get some notes from some people saying that it's Canada Day, that they can't join us live, but we will be sending out a recordings for all our Canadian friends that couldn't make it live with us today. And I, of course, am Alexander Cardwell, marketing director here at Smart. This is my 7th comms debate, and these are always a lot of fun. Smart, in case you don't know who we are an employee communications platform that really allows you to reach a really diverse and dispersed workforce with targeted personalized communication. So if you want to learn more about Smart, I'll leave some contact information at the end of the presentation. And I see we have some people, a bunch of people across the globe in the audience. Hey, from Oslo, Mickey calling out the Suns there. Good to see that. We have Liverpool, Helsinki, Switzerland, New Hampshire, Oregon, Czech Republic. Wow. Okay, so we have people across the board. Thank you so much for joining us live, and it is really great to see such a diverse audience here today. Quickly before we go into the first statement, just some brief housekeeping and debate guidelines. So in case you haven't been with us for a debate before, the way this works is there will be 6 statements, all related to the practice of internal communications. And now for this debate, we decided to kind of frame the discussion around back to work, kind of post-pandemic back to work and hybrid work related communications. So all those statements will be somewhat related to that topic. Our speakers will, on each statement, have to briefly either agree or disagree with the statement, and then we'll open up for roughly 5 minutes of discussion, open discussion on each statement. Now, we do encourage you to, whenever you have any questions, feel free to put them again into that same questions tab that you just used to put in your location. Do ask questions throughout the session, and we'll be picking them up as we go along. And last but not least, our content manager has told me to just ask to remind everybody that do feel free to tweet at us and post on LinkedIn using the hashtag #GreatCommsDebate. We like to kind of collect a lot of that stuff and see the love, spread it out through social media. All right, but with that, I think we can go ahead and move on to statement number 1, which reads, WhatsApp is the new water cooler of the remote worker. And now, of course, a lot of discussion going on about using WhatsApp for communications in an enterprise setting or in a company setting. So how do our speakers feel about this? Maybe Rebecca, you can open up and tell us whether you agree or disagree with the statement.
So I agree with this statement, mostly because while WhatsApp has been used by leadership teams, I know on the side, even though internal comms has told them you should not be using those channels because it shouldn't be talking about business and such on these, I found that it's been working. People have been using it more because they can't have those anonymous discussions that can't be tracked digitally by their employer. And I've seen more and more where I've heard either been looped into WhatsApp conversations, heard of them going on during big meetings, big leadership teams, people making comments and being able to vent, whether that's positive or negative for the company. So I would say yes, there has to be a new water cooler for the remote worker to contact their colleagues anonymous without being tracked, and WhatsApp seems to be that medium.
All right, thanks. Monique, how about you? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree because I see the water cooler as something that's spontaneous. It's those networks and unexpected connections, and WhatsApp is, as you mentioned, Rebecca, used for business reasons. It's used by senior leadership teams, and I don't see it as the water cooler of the new remote worker. Yeah. There are plenty of other apps out there that can do just as good, if not better, job.
All right. So Mike, how about you? Agree or disagree?
Disagree on several levels. I think the biggest disagreement is that there is no real water cooler analog in the remote world. There are places for informal communications, but they tend to be between people who already know each other. What you really want anyways is not a water cooler, but a smoking area, because that's where you really have the most democratic and demographically diverse random communication between parts of an organization. I'd be looking for the remote smoking area before I start looking for the remote water cooler. But the other thing is that there is going to be a use of a variety of informal and formal communication channels in organizations where people are not going to want to be tracked all the time. So sometimes it'll be WhatsApp, sometimes it'll be Slack, sometimes it'll be public LinkedIn groups or semi-public LinkedIn groups or private LinkedIn groups, or maybe it'll be a platform that hasn't yet emerged. It could be a company-specific platform. It could be something in Teams. We don't know. I mean, the main thing is all organizations have some form of informal communication. Remote, it's going to be, in terms of finding common threads about it, it's still too early to tell.
Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thanks, guys. And kind of a common thing that you all slightly discussed, or at least slightly touched on there, is the issue of tracking and being able to track those conversations. And specifically with WhatsApp, it's very hard to track what kind of conversations are going on for the workforce. How big of an issue is that in this kind of water cooler, remote smoking area concept? Should those even be discussions that are trackable, or should they just be kind of open discussions?
If I can jump in, I think from a comms perspective, more than ever, it's super important to have an idea of what people are talking about. Misinformation has been a huge issue over the past year, and that's why, from a comms perspective, it's ideal that we at least have a sense of what's being shared. And sure, people are entitled to their privacy, but if there's miscommunication happening, we really need to jump in and address that. And I would like to also say that from a water cooler or a smoking room perspective, you can still see who's there and who's talking with who. It's not entirely, it's the kitchen as well, like people walking past. It's not entirely private.
Right.
So I don't think an entirely private space is absolutely essential for employees. I mean, they're entitled to it, but that would be my view.
Yeah, I would agree that the one thing that has come out of remote working is that relationships have become more siloed. You don't get that spontaneity because there aren't adaptive platforms available at the moment. So going into remote working where everyone was on remote, gossip has not been spreading as easily. And I can say that for knowing, like, people not knowing things that they'd know before when ad hocly, when managing my stakeholders and figuring out what's going on. The information is more siloed. So while the water cooler, the WhatsApp's not the ideal water cooler, people are going places to engage, but there isn't that place that allows for that cross-pollination the same.
Right, so that kind of one central hub. Think maybe, digging even a little deeper on this, because obviously one of the big concerns with, and I think it was mentioned here in the beginning as well, is like the security and the reliable, WhatsApp is a reliable and secure channel. And like in general, these kind of ad hoc channels might not be, secure for discussing workplace matters. So what do you got? Do you have any advice for communicators out there? Should they encourage the use of these tools, or should they encourage the use of kind of more like vetted, secure, maybe ISO certified tools?
I think, as the economists say, it depends.
Yeah.
Because there are a couple of competing concerns. One is obviously we, as IC folk, have a concern that correct information spreads through the organization. But employees, and particularly professional employees, remote working employees in particular, in organizations that have highly perfectionistic cultures or don't have a high degree of tolerance for mistakes, you have to be able to thrash stuff out with people, often in writing, and you don't want it to be part of the public record. You don't want to be caught out for a mistake in a draft when something's a draft. So there's going to need to be a balance between creating systems that allow people to work effectively within a cultural context, and systems which allow correct information to spread to the right people. And they may have to be different channels.
Right. So like there's almost not like a, one channel fits all. There's like a omni-channel approach essentially.
There's no one water cooler, is there, ever in an office? There's always multiple spots where people kind of lurk and really get that interpersonal communication happening.
If you want to look at, I'm sorry.
I was just going to say, Mark made a really good point. I just saw on the chat there that with WhatsApp, I've just lost the question now. Just zoomed out of my that it's perfect for communicating with people who have already an established relationship there. And the beautiful thing about the water cooler is that you might bump into the CEO or bump into someone else. And I think Yammer has more of those kind of random cross-pollination opportunities than WhatsApp does, because it's closed. Sorry, Mike.
So like the serendipity of connections. Yeah,
and that's the beautiful thing about the water cooler is people actually lurk near the water cooler or the kitchen when they see someone they want to catch. They kind of duck into the kitchen and grab them, whereas it's a great hierarchical leveler.
Right. Good. Well, I think obviously there are some other good questions here, but I think we could talk about this topic for days, and we do have 6 others that we want to cover. So I think in the interest of time, let's keep keep rolling and go on to statement number 2, which reads, the biggest problem that employees are facing is information overload and bombardment from all directions. So obviously, that as communications evolve and become more frequent, and add on, think about all the channels, your emails, your various platforms that you're working with, you do get a lot of stuff pointed at you, but is it the biggest problem? So Monique, how about you start us off here? Do you agree or disagree?
I agree. I'm basing this on conversations and client work that I've been doing over the past year. We're going through a digital revolution at the moment, and with every revolution, there are effects, and a lack of governance and sort of some of the mindset isn't quite there yet. So it is messy. I think the staff are overwhelmed with the different numbers of messages. I think there was a Microsoft report that said 5 minutes is still the average for people responding on Teams, and yet there's, I think, 45% more messages happening on Teams, that people are just frantically all over the place, and managers are also overwhelmed with the number of likes and comments that they feel they're obliged to do with their team members' comments. So there's that kind of social media feeding kind of frenzy happening.
Yeah. How about you, Mike? Do you agree or disagree?
Well, it's hard to say the biggest problem because organizations are different. I mean, I just came here from North Dakota, where there seems to be a massive labor shortage and employees are just plain overworked. So, I mean, we need to look at this in context. I would probably say the biggest internal communication problem that employees deal with is information overload, bombardment from all directions, and an utter lack of prioritization and signaling around the messaging. And I think one of the things that I'm starting to see from the very little bit of research I've started to do with remote first organizations is that there's two things that ring out as critical. One is centrality, that they need to have certain central authoritative channels that are clearly the voice of the organization's version of the truth. And from that, in that perspective, its definition of what's important priority and operations wise. The second is discipline. You've got to, it's not like in an organization where you can expect word of mouth to carry the load. There is word of mouth, as we've discussed in remote first organizations, but the dynamics are different than in an office-based organization. But the two key things are centrality and discipline. If you want to break the noise and certainly in a remote world, because if you just got everybody putting out their stuff and saying everybody needs to see this, you're going to have mayhem and chaos.
Right. Well, how about you, Rebecca? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree. I don't think it's the biggest problem. It's an ongoing problem. Touching on what Monique said about Teams, where people are using and all these channels and such, I think there's a big issue with people understanding the purpose of certain channels and understanding what's expectation, because people are using Teams, as I've observed, like an email. They put the post into the ether of the team and they expect people to respond, and they don't follow up.
Okay.
And that's just one issue, but it's that understanding that the purpose of the channels and why, but also how, depending on the organization, the internal communications teams being able to help people understand how to get their message out, because people want to get messages out. It's about having, and they've always had, they're like, oh, if I just put it out there, people are going to see it and they're going to be won over. No, there are processes and ways to do it. So I think it's an education piece on people understanding how to most effectively use their own time and not just get an endorphin rush because they posted something. And when everyone does that, it just ends up being noise, and the people ignore everything because it's not personalized to them. And it's not something. So the biggest problem is people not understanding that comms is a skilled and process-driven activity.
Right. Yeah, I remember there's good discussion when the whole COVID pandemic started with especially like kind of these transactional comms-based platforms like Teams, Slack, kind of quick work stream collaboration tools where that stuff on those platforms tends to turn to vapor in a matter of seconds. So if you have a really crucial update and people like start hammering message below, suddenly it's way up there, and then you start posting pictures of cats and and memes and stuff.
Nothing wrong with cats pictures.
Nothing wrong with cats. We'll reserve those for the water cooler.
And I think that's the challenge that a lot of people have, is like segmenting out like what's the important information and what isn't. And as you said, Rebecca, it's really that people don't know how to use the channels, and that goes back to we're going through a evolution at the moment, and the governance and the guidance isn't really in place. For example, IT have just said yes and opened up Pandora's box of all of these beautiful products, and they're all just scattered all over the place. And there hasn't that narrowing down and really defining what your organisation needs and how they should be communicating within the organisation, down to just like the right channels for the organisation. Just I see that nobody's really nailed that yet.
Right. And there's an interesting question here from Karen on. I'd be interested to hear whether segmentation and personalization can help combat the overload. Any experiences to share? And like I could talk at length about smart targeting and personalization capabilities, but we're not here to talk about that. So I'm interested to hear that. Do you guys have any experiences to share on this? Mike's raising his hand.
Sure. I mean, there's a number of ways to do it. I mean, obviously, personalization that's driven by employee needs and tastes can work. Also, things like organizational network analysis, figuring out who the 3% of people who drive 90% of conversations are. Some organizations aren't brave enough to do that in this climate, but I think those that will have a much enhanced ability to not just allow their employees to cut through their noise, but also to cut through the relevance of their employees to get the right messages to the right people at the right time.
Right.
Also, I'd say there's, in some organizations that are quite political, there's this thought of that if they send it to all the people, no one will be offended, but then they don't get the right reaction because they're not being specific enough with their message. So there's also that importance that if someone's going to personalize it, that they actually look at their audience list. If they don't have digital means to segment, if it's doing it on a viewpoint, what do you need from those people, instead of just saying, we just need to get this out. What do you really want people to do? And if you focus on that, then that helps segment and personalize to create that call to action piece to get the people to act.
Right.
And I think we've seen like the trend at the moment in the intranet side is the microsites, where you get very, very personalized information. And I mean, we're seeing this in the big wide world of marketing, where you go to the Financial Times and everything's, the contact number for if you've got questions is in your language, in your country, the time set to your time zone, the experience is set to what you've been doing. And I think it's about time that we really focused on this user experience in internal communications. And I know some companies are doing that really well with the segmented, super segmented comms and manager notifications and everything sort of set out in that intranet workplace desktop.
Right. And one thing, I can also share from our side, what we've seen at SMARP is that another great way, like, of course, personalization of the actual message, the content of the messages is super important, because not everything's going to be relevant for everybody. But we see that across, our clients and the companies using SMARP, that different employee segments prefer even different mediums, like video, like image, text-based. So, what one department might enjoy actually just quickly reading, like skimming an article, whereas another one might want to watch a video. So that's a kind of further way to even personalize delivery for each audience segment.
And then you bring languages into it as well. With a client that I've been working with, everything's done in a couple of languages, and the news article has all of those different languages in the one article, whereas good segmentation would mean that I would receive my news in English, and other people would receive their news in Indian or whatever their preferred language was.
Exactly. All right, but yeah, great. Again, another great discussion topic, and I think we could. There are a bunch of great. We can continue some of this conversation offline. There's a bunch of great comments here. I love seeing that. But let's go ahead and keep the show rolling and move on to statement number 3. which reads, "In reality, there is no such thing as hybrid." Now, this is an interesting one because obviously hybrid work and hybrid communications, all that, it's a big, big topic. So how about we start with Mike? Do you agree or disagree with this?
I emphatically agree. If you consider hybrid everything from fully remote to fully office-based, it becomes a completely meaningless distinction, A. And B, there's an awful lot of hype in organizations presenting what are effectively modified office-based solutions as hybrid, and also presenting them as permanent when in fact they may well be temporary. The key thing to look at with hybrid is at best it's the first round. It's a transitional arrangement organizations figure out whether they're going to be better off office-based or whether they're going to be better off remote first. And as such, it's not helpful to the conversation about where are we going at all. I see really two models out there. The office-based model with varying degrees of flexibility for certain employees, or a remote first model, maybe with a few fixed desks in a few locations to facilitate whether legal requirements or occasional in-person encounters. But the other side of it is that the future of this hybrid approach, or for that matter, remote first and office based, is not just going to be driven by employee preferences or organizational culture. It's going to be driven by financial issues, the amount of money it's going to cost to maintain the level of flexibility that people want, and competitive issues. Because, for example, if you're an investment bank and you're living off of expensive lunches or working off of expensive lunches and high-priced real estate, what happens when you encounter a remote first competitor that has an effective business model but has zero overheads by comparison? That's not going to be a sustainable situation. I mean, any industry that's based on intangible or services or non-physical work, could very easily move into a remote first environment. And even physical businesses could move into remote first administration very easily.
I love that. And I love the emphatic response. But how about you, Rebecca? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree, and I take it from the view of international corporations where you have people who have some people go into the office, but their team is remote and they have to call in, and they have this. And where I think they're missing a trick at the moment is that people, when they have their teams are international and they're the lone person in the office somewhere, they're like a second-class citizen, and it's always that they're missing out on conversation stuff. And the reason I say that there is a hybrid is that I think there needs to be more investment in hybrid to make sure that everyone's on an equal playing field when you have an international team that needs to engage properly and needs to feel like they're not, because they're not in the hub, like because they're in the rest of the world, that they're not getting the advantages or the support or the care of the company, which I've seen, especially with certain companies, when they do reorgs, focusing on the hubs, and then the rest of the world doesn't know if they're going to be impacted or how because they're not being the focus. I think there's a great advantage for a focus on hybrid to acknowledge the balance between people who have to go into an office and engage with people in reality, but also have their important stakeholders, their managers, and what they're delivering to other parts of the world.
Right. Yeah. But I mean, obviously, and the concept you bring up is also kind of almost like rather than hybrid work, almost like a hybrid team, right? Because you have parts of the workforce going in or the team going in.
I'd like to say it is hybrid because the person is balancing both. They're balancing the in-person, they're balancing the relationships with their team. And when there is budget to travel, they can meet these people in person, the leadership team, and build those relationships. Otherwise, all they're left with is trying to build rapport virtually. And it really comes down to what tools they have to be able to engage with the rest of the company and their teams and feel like they're still part of the same unit and not the long lost cousins, which I get when I work with stakeholders and work with teams. That's what that sentiment comes out quite a bit.
Right. Well, how about you, Monique? Do you agree or disagree with this?
I think we're talking about the wrong thing. Because I prefer to call it blended working. And I talk from my personal perspective of, at the moment, I'm in Berlin, but my head office is in Copenhagen. And we also have another head office in Cape Town and other employees employed elsewhere. And it's it's really, I think now is the opportunity for us and workplaces to just throw the cards in the air and re-look at how we do work from a fundamental point of view rather than tinking at the edges. I used to work at the Australian Taxation Office in Australia, and that was my previous role as to now. And I had one of my direct reports was in Canberra. I was in Melbourne. I had a manager in Sydney who I saw once or twice a year. And what we're talking about with the technology of connecting of the team, it wouldn't have mattered if my manager was at home or if he was in the office there. It's beyond the home versus the central hub.
Right.
And yeah, and I think there's we were doing really great stuff in terms of there's the activity-based work, which is also when you're in the office, how can you maximize that connection and collaboration? And we were doing some testing we had a floor set out in the Melbourne office that was completely hybrid work set up, if that's what you want to call it, where we had quiet spaces. When you came in, you could sit at whatever desk you wanted to. We had collaboration spaces, and it was definitely a different way of thinking. And when people talk about hybrid versus at sort of home versus the office, they also forget a lot of those elements around reducing office space footprints and a lot of financial benefits as well to a company in terms of offering different working environments and flexible working times.
Right.
Yeah. At the time as well, we had a flexibility first policy. So I had to justify if one of my team asked to work sort of 2 days at home, I had to provide a reason why that was not possible. And I've obviously got a lot of learnings I'm very happy to talk about as we discuss this further. Yeah. But it's not a new concept, and I think dispersed workforce is probably a better way to look at it because it doesn't really matter where you are.
Yeah, makes sense. One thing that kind of struck me when we started talking about this, and the notion of hybrid work or remote work versus office-based work, is this kind of shift where if we start having people that you have organizations that are doing both, some people are remote, some people are in the office, is this going to increase the amount of complexity in communications, for example? Because now some people you can deliver to an office-based workforce, and for some you need to kind of cater to the remote working. Is that going to increase complexity, or is it a non-issue?
Go, Mike.
I think that's why we need to go back to the notion that really there are either office-based organizations which have remote and dispersed elements, or remote-first organizations which have some fixed elements. Because ultimately what I'm saying is that the rules of engagement for remote-first organizations and office-based organizations are diverging, because remote-based organizations don't have access to certain tools and channels that office-based organizations have tended to rely on. Things like posters, conference rooms, physical spaces, and the effect that those spaces have on informal as well as formal communication. Right. If you're a combination office-based, remote-based organization, and you want a level playing field, then you need to play by remote-first rules. Because otherwise you're going to be creating channels and platforms and conversations that are going to exclude your dispersed workforce. That may require a much more disciplined approach to internal communication than office-based organizations are used to having. On the other hand, if you're going to rely on, if you're going to be substantially office-based, then you need, as part of your compact with your remote employees, that they're going to need to take the initiative to follow up on what informally is going on within the office environment. And to say that there's a hybrid model somewhere in between, you're not going to be able to manage that issue.
Right. Yeah, and there's a good comment from Mark here, and that this increases complexity in terms of what an employee experience of an organization is, and that won't help setting culture. So definitely a topic that does need to be tackled. But again, we're over halfway through and only got half of the statements done. So I think we should keep the show rolling and move on to statement number 4, which is another really interesting one, which is remote working is for the young. And this is based on some of the topics and the rumors we had heard. And now I know, Mike, we can't see you currently, but I think we can hear you. So how about you go first? Do you agree or disagree? We can hear you. Yeah. I guess you're just having some bandwidth issues.
I would disagree. Remote working, if anything, creates a ton of new opportunities for older workers, for parents who are actively involved in, in the parenting process on a day-to-day basis, for, marginalized communities, people with physical and, perhaps even mental handicaps to a certain extent. One of the things that I noticed, when I first got into corporate life 20-odd years ago, was how little white hair there was in the office. And what I found out was basically a lot of older workers got pensioned off and then ended up working as consultants to the same company. So this is not a new phenomenon, but the issue now is that remote working creates a much more favorable environment, both from a labor market perspective and from a workplace perspective, for employees who don't meet, experienced employees who don't meet traditional workplace, socialization standards, if you will. On the other hand, young employees have higher mentoring needs and may benefit from being in more in-office, onboarding, mentoring, the whole bit. To go from university and then, be a fully functioning executive in a remote organization when your company is 4 walls and a screen, it may not be so effective. So, younger employees may like the idea of remote working, but I think it may actually be the older employees and the more non-traditional employees who actually get the benefits most immediately.
That's good. I want to at the end, after we're done cycling around, I want to go back to the mentorship part, because that's something I've actually just been reading about recently. But let's still keep going with the agree disagree. How about Rebecca? How about you? Do you agree or disagree?
I disagree as well. And firsthand, if you can imagine it, I was responsible for comms for a building opening up in November, if you can imagine that. Not a great time to open a building. But the people who were coming in were the younger people, and they were citing mental health needs and such, that they needed a space to work. They needed to get out of their flat, and they weren't handling it. For older workers, I found it, especially when you're working consulting, that the older you get, the more flexibility you get, and you can say, oh, I'm working from home today. Whereas when you're young, you're like, I have to get a permission. So it's like this view of seniority and such. But I do agree with Mike with the mentorship part, in terms of it is, and I was overseeing some work with some juniors, and it does make it difficult to keep that engagement up and to make sure that they feel supported, and that, because sometimes they don't want to admit that they're stuck. And it's more about being in the office and giving them a look of, how are you doing? And then it comes out that, so it's that having that interpersonal connection for younger people is definitely really important.
Yeah, makes sense. Monique, how about you? Agree or disagree?
I agree. Sorry, I disagree with the statement, and I agree with Mike and Rebecca, absolutely. I started with open communication in December, and it wasn't until last weekend that I actually met all the people I've been working with, not all, but half of them in person. And it was hard, and I know it's hard for everyone to onboard into a remotely onboard. So that kind of, as you said, the connection at the start and the mentoring is really important. And what you've been saying, Mark and Rebecca, is also hugely supported with Microsoft's latest work trend index that came out in March. And they found that the baby boomers are the ones who are best able to deal with this working from home situation, because it's sort of the people with family and also the younger generation, Gen Z.
Yeah.
Now, loneliness has definitely been identified, and that lack of connection at the start of your career has definitely been identified as an issue. And it's also the senior executive who have been shown to be most easily comfortable with this sort of hybrid or rather remote working environment. And it's also the mindset of the organisation. I think a lot of people might say, oh, technology, older people can't do. That's completely a fallacy. And I think it really comes back because seriously, my parents are more up to speed with social media than I think I am, and my mum's on WhatsApp all the time to me. But I think it's the mindset of the organisation which is really influential. If you're working for a digital-first organisation, then they're more easily, regardless of the age of the employee, able to transition. Oh, okay, we've been doing, WebEx or various webinars, connecting with people from across the country. This is just, connecting from home. It's no big deal. Whereas I was speaking with someone last year, and it was right before Corona actually, and they were telling me that they asked their colleague if their colleague had read their email, and their colleague said, yes, I've printed it out and I've put it on my in tray and I'll read it tomorrow. And they were telling me how it was a government organisation, that they still have the trolley of, files that get shipped up to the top floor or down to the other floor. And an organisation like that's obviously going to find it much harder to transition into a remote working environment. And I just don't think we can also forget the people who are having to work in the office, in production, in frontline staff, who this is completely sort of a different view and perspective there as well.
And it's interesting. So, like, almost the consensus is that it's not for the young. It's quite the opposite. One thing, because you all kind of touched a little bit on mentorship there. One thing that I was recently reading about was the biggest issue with remote work in terms of the younger workforce is that they don't get necessarily that mentorship from the older, more senior members of the organization. Is there a way that maybe internal communications could start bridging that gap? Because like it or not, a lot of people are going to be working remotely now, and younger people as well. So how does that, is there a way IC can bridge that?
Well, I think that one of the biggest breakthroughs that's going to come out of the remote first organization is not just, IC bridging those gaps, but in fact, IC managing to increase the employee to manager ratio by a significant amount. Because if IC could have some of the context setting and priority setting responsibilities, then the managers can handle much more direct performance stuff and much more, target setting and things like that. I mean, one of the challenges about management in the, office-based environment is it takes a lot of managers to manage relatively few people because of the sheer volume of interpersonal interactions. If you can streamline that, and I've always believed that IC could streamline the role of management if it was tasked with doing that. I think the opportunities now emerge for that to happen, which is of immense benefit to the IC profession.
Yeah, and that's again highlighting the importance of quality communications department and the ability to do that. Rebecca, Monique, anything to add there?
Sorry, Rebecca.
Oh, no, you go.
I was just going to say one of the other things I do on the side is I'm a mentor for the mentoring club, and a lot of the conversations I have been hearing over the past year have been to do with people needing that additional, and that's where the whole mentoring club came out of, with people needing that additional support through this sort of remote working phase. And it's definitely I think something that should be embedded in like a HR broader employee experience combined with comms, but I don't think it's comms' job to solve that mentoring, because the mentoring, like the best mentoring is actually very personal and one-on-one and some group work, because then it's individualized and you can talk about, and the mentor should never be your manager. So again, this is why I say like a good mentoring program, whether it's within the organization or outside of the organization, is really what should be driving this, I think, and complemented with internal communication.
Right.
I just add that, no, I agree. I don't believe it belongs to internal comms, but I do believe it is something that isn't a tick in the box. The organization has to be prepared to invest money, whether it's training to make sure that the managers or whoever is in that position understands what coaching is, because I've seen it too many where, oh, this is your coach, and it's really a crapshoot whether the person actually is equipped to coach and what coaching means. And also agree not to be your manager, because when that, I've had that, and when that happens, you're like, you're trying to get a promotion and you're trying to still improve yourself. Oh, come on. Come on.
Absolutely, and I'd recommend anyone starting out in a new organisation or trying to improve themselves professionally to get a mentor, because that additional support and insight they can give is, regardless if you're working remotely or not, is just invaluable.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, thanks for opening up on that a little bit. That's a good takeaway. Your mentor should not be your manager.
Yeah, absolutely.
Sense. Yeah. But yeah, let's keep the show rolling. We have 2 more to cover. We have about 15 minutes, so let's get to it. And statement number 5 reads: authenticity is the key to leadership communication. Now, obviously, during the pandemic, there have been a bunch of great examples of authentic leadership communications, and some not as great examples. But how about our speakers? Do you agree or disagree? Rebecca, maybe you can go first.
So I disagree, and this is a bugbear of mine. And the reason I disagree is I think authenticity becomes the shiny thing that people aim for without taking care about what their audience needs from them and being audience-centered. And it becomes more about how the leader's coming across and what the leader needs to look like, rather than focusing on preparing your message, preparing what you want, preparing everything else, instead of getting your eyes off yourself. Because there's too many egocentric leaders out there already who all they need is another person to say, just be authentic. It's like, oh yes, my authentic self is great. No, you're not. And also the other reason I don't like it is that the idea of authenticity does stop other people from thinking that they can be effective leaders as well and effective communicators. And they're like, oh, well, I can't be authentic. It's like, no, get your eyes off yourself. And the amount of people I've coached who think that they can never be like that, and I have to say, that person's trained years to be like that. That doesn't come naturally. None of that comes naturally.
Right.
You can do the work to get there, but it's the audience-centric is what I push.
Yeah, that's a good point. Sometimes it becomes more about just the authenticity, the actual message, even. How about you, Monique? Agree or disagree?
I actually agree that authenticity is the key to leadership communication, but I think that the difference, Rebecca, is really on our definition of what authentic leadership is, because one of my people I love listening to, Seth Godin, his view of authentic leadership is like you can let your gut hang out and, have a bad day and take it out on everybody. And I don't see that. I see authentic leadership as also being respectful. And there are some great leaders such as Jacinta Ardern, or I think Angela Merkel has also done a great job, where it's just about showing some vulnerability and infusing honesty in the conversation. And I think it is about being audience-centric, in that you consider the other person's feelings. Like if you're having a bad day, you wouldn't take it out on your partner, would you? Well, I'd hope you wouldn't.
Yeah.
And in the same way, you'd also consider your team. You'd consider the people around you. I'm in a bad day. I just want to let you know I'm not having a great day. But yeah, let's get on with the job. Tell me what you need. That kind of approach.
Right.
So I think it just comes down to the definition, Rebecca.
How about you, Mike? Agree or disagree?
I think it comes down to the definition of key more than anything else. I mean, authenticity or integrity or honesty is a table stake. It's not the most important thing. is prioritization. People need to know what's important. They need to have some guidance in terms of what they do and how they do it and when they do it, because that reduces the ambiguity and that allows them to help navigate through the clutter. Authenticity alone doesn't do that.
Right. So one of the things, obviously that related to authenticity and communications was especially during the COVID pandemic, there's some good examples of like CEOs and leaders being very transparent about they were having to lay people off, like why, the rationale, the next steps. So obviously authenticity plays a part, but the audience-centric piece is equally important. One thing that I can think of off the top of my head is like using humor in communications. Like some people might get the joke and not everybody's going to. So you always need to balance those out. But like, yeah, obviously, like some of the authentic comms examples that I just laid out kind of were layoff related, COVID related. Do you have any other good examples on how leaders can be authentic but still be audience centric, maybe outside of this kind of COVID world?
I think
asking questions instead of talking to people.
Yep. That was I think I can't remember who I was talking to. It was like tip number one for a good communicator is to ask questions rather than just tell stuff.
And to listen.
Yeah.
It's also about being open so that people are actually going to tell you what they feel safe to feel. So the psychological safety required for effective, and if we're using Monique's definition of authentic, an approachable leader needs to be someone who's also willing to take chances to hear what people think and take feedback and look at changing how they're approaching things so that they recognize they don't know everything and they've hired people because they have skills to bring to the table.
Yeah, exactly.
And that comes back to that sort of central concept of trust. Like if people trust that your leader will tell you when something's not good and trust that they will do their best for you, but trust as well that they're not going to bullshit you. And I think an authentic leader does not, like there's no bullshit there.
Right. Yeah, it is like, I love this. There's like a debate on itself going on, or a conversation going on in the chat, and I love this, like, why do orgs insist that they have to, about this comment by Bill, why do orgs insist that they have to appeal to the interest of their clients and customers, whereas with employee communications, they don't word their communications so that they focus on employee interests. And that's, I think, something we can all kind of take away for all of our communications. You got to think about the audience as well, rather than just pushing thinking that you're pushing an authentic message across. All right, but I think we have one more topic to go, and we only have 7 minutes. So I'm gonna go ahead and move on to the last statement here, which reads, "We are digital communication experts and should be driving this transformation." By this transformation, of course, we've been talking a lot about the transition and transformation of work as we know it, going from primarily office-based to having lots of remote work elements in there, and hybrid work, even though we said one of the statements was that it doesn't exist, but that this transformation should be driven by digital communications experts. Monique, do you agree or disagree with this?
I don't agree. I think we need to be digital communication experts in the future, but I don't think internal comms is quite there yet. We're working on that journey. And I also think that the transformation needs to be a combination of, it needs to be driven by leadership, and it needs to incorporate everything from HR to the physical, sort of the workplace services, to it needs to be a partnership to make things change. Otherwise you've got one person waving the flag and a whole bunch of other areas of the business dragging their feet. And hybrid dispersed work needs a complete rethink.
Right. So there's like more than just one stakeholder in this kind of a transformation.
Absolutely.
Mike, how about you? Agree or disagree?
I disagree with the wording. I think we are leaders and we should be driving this transformation along with other leaders. And this is about our collective confidence as a profession, as a tribe, as a community. because we understand not the digital element, the communication element, and the business element, how it all interacts together. And we can talk credibly with leaders about this stuff. I mean, some of us don't think we can, but we need to, generate that confidence so that we can do so. Because otherwise, it's going to be, aspiration first and then communication structures and platforms to follow. And that's a recipe for disaster, as it has always been. So we need to raise we see ourselves as leaders in this process, and that we drive this transformation along with the other leaders we work with.
Right. So kind of similar sentiment. Comms isn't the only stakeholder here. It has to be a cross-functional effort. How about you, Rebecca? Agreed.
Those are equal stakeholders.
Exactly.
So I believe I agree with the first part, but not necessarily the second. The first about the digital communication experts. I do believe it's very important for us to understand what the different channels have to offer. This past year, I mentioned I was in charge of comms for a building that was opening. So I was looking at different online versions of a building that we could use to help people socialize and cross-pollinate and such before they moved into the building. And I realized that the company didn't have anything signed off, so I ended up on a working group evaluating 30-odd platforms to do all sorts of things, from showcasing to allowing for networking. And all I wanted was a place where we can network so we could replicate the building, so we could get that culture started. And if we don't, and I do think a lot of companies haven't invested enough money, and while I don't think we should be driving the transformation, I do think the question has to be brought up: how are we replicating the office? Because an office is designed by an architect to have people cross-pollinate. It's designed to get people across paths. It's great for a pandemic because it's forcing people to get infected, but hopefully with ideas. That's what we want. So how do we do that? So how do we do that with a virtual space? How do we do that with the corporate channels? And if we just have the leadership choosing what the comms channels are going to be, then we're just reacting to the channels we have and then planning around that. We need to be thinking through, or at least aware of, how the channels could be used or what new technology is coming, and helping the leadership not sign on to a 5-year deal with a company that has crap platforms, and helping them find one that's going to be the right one for the org, for the culture, and allows us to help them engage. So while I don't think we should be driving it, we should at least be advising, and we should have an understanding of the tech that's out there and where the tech's going.
You go ahead, Monique.
I was just going to jump on that and say that this fits into my pet topic of immersive communication, where I think we're too focused on the individual channels and what's being dictated to us. Again, different organizations I've worked with have got like limited channels or too many channels, and the immersive communication is looking at it from a holistic point of view of what is the employee experience in the digital environment, and looking at how you communicate with people with different options and ways of communicating. So not just text-based or not just video-based, it's that mix, and also giving them the choice of how they consume content and how they respond and react to it. So I think there's a whole another space there that we can delve into and talk about.
Right. I think, one of the big things here, and you all kind of mentioned that this is not just, a comms, like comms isn't the only stakeholder driving this type of transformation. It's a cross-functional effort. It's a team effort. And I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, there's lots of discussion of comms now getting a seat at the proverbial, leadership table. Has that happened? Does comms have that seat at the table? Are they trusted advisors to make this transformation? Don't all go at once. Yes, the audience says yes. Or is the jury still out there?
Our economist friends say it depends.
Yeah.
It depends.
Yeah.
I think it's something that we've been, as internal comms experts, constantly, not just last year, but previously, wanting to be the trusted advisor, working hard towards being in that advisory role. As you said, there's a seat at the table, not the newsletter publisher and not the button pusher.
Right.
And I think in a lot of organisations, we've been given the opportunity, and it's now about continuing to show our value. Other organisations, perhaps not so much. Mike?
Yeah.
I agree. It depends. I mean, it's a function of, it's a function of what the organization thinks it does, how sensitive communication is to the delivery to the customer, to the delivery internally, to the engagement, et cetera. And I mean, I think where internal communicators are winning, they're aligning themselves with the mission and the process of the business. And they're solving business problems, and they're working for stakeholders who appreciate what they do. I mean, one of the things that's going to have to be looked at again is where does internal communication sit? I mean, to say that it's an HR function when in a remote first organization, it is the organizational infrastructure. I mean, that's a recipe for, certainly misprioritization at least. So all of these things that we've been talking about in the field are stuff that's going to have to be reexamined, so that we don't just get ourselves a seat at the table, but we get ourselves a seat in the right position, doing the right stuff for the right stakeholders.
Right. Exactly. All right. Well, guys, with that, we're already past the top of the hour, so I think we can go on to our closing remarks. First of all, thank you guys so much for joining us today and sharing your insight. And thank you, everybody in the chat. It's been one of the more active chats, and like people going back and forth and agreeing and disagreeing. I think we should next time we should introduce polls to let audience members agree and disagree. That would be fun. Stay tuned for Comms Debate 8. But with that, again, thank you everybody for joining, guys. If you want to, everybody in the audience, if you want to reach out to any of our speakers or learn more about SMARP and what the employee communications platform we provide, contact information is there on the screen. But any last words of wisdom before we sign off, guys? Again, don't all go at once.
I just wanted to say thank you. Go, Mark.
If anybody's in a remote first organization, let me know. I'm very interested in learning more about what you're doing and how you're doing it.
Yeah. There you go. And all of our speakers obviously super interested to talk to you about anything communication. So I do encourage you to reach out to each and every one of them. Well, again, hey, with that, guys, thank you so much for joining. Thank you, everybody in the chat. And yeah, we will not. Of course, if you've been to a bunch of our sessions before, you might be wondering when's the next one? When's the next one? We always promote the next one at the end of the show. Holiday season is upon us, so we will be taking July off, but we'll be back with a really interesting one in August. So look forward to that. But for now, everybody stay safe, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.